So, Berto, the last time that we recorded, we just wrapped up our Elon Musk deep dive.
And this is the start of our Donald Trump deep dive.
Oh, God. And I thought we would just do something a little easier.
All right.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor and a podcaster.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I study people that feed ducks on Fridays.
So I thought, first of all, we would talk about Inside Out too, because a lot of people have been asking us to chime in about it. Mm-hmm. We have made an episode about the first one a while back. It is a very psychological movie with a lot of interesting models of emotion and motivation and development and puberty and anxiety. Also, it's one of my favorite movies. Yeah. Inside Out 1 is in maybe my top 10 movie, and I take, when the average person says, oh yeah, that's probably like a top 10 movie to me, mm-hmm. I'm always a little suspicious, because if they really sat down and went through every single movie systematically the way I have, I'm guessing that there's a lot of movies they think are in their top 10 but would get bumped out by other movies. You know what I mean? Whereas for me, when I say it's top 10, it's like it's been mulled over a lot, like every...
You have the ratings to prove, like you go back to all your...
And on IMDb, I have, thousands of ratings, and there's probably maybe a couple hundred tens that I've rated. And so of those tens, what do I put in the top 10? Anyway, so Inside Out 1 is a big deal, but let's talk about Inside Out 2. Out of 10, how many Bertos would you give it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have to give it a 10, man. Because, well, I guess if I were rating the first one compared to the second one, obviously the first one has a few novelty bonus points because, we just hadn't seen something like that. And I guess the story was even tighter. It was like just a little better. But I also loved the second one so much, and I cried my eyes out and things like that. So,
like more than the first one? Yeah.
So, I cried more in the second one than the first one.
That's interesting because, I get this text from you of a GIF of like an alien or a human or something being desiccated, having all of the water sucked out of them, and I'm like, huh? What's going on? And you're like, I have no fluids left in my body. And I'm like, is this a sexual thing? What's happening? And you're like, I just went to the movies and saw a Pixar movie. And I'm like, and you're thirsty? Do you need water? What's happening? Insert 5 more obscure jokes. And you're like, I saw Inside Out too. And I'm crying the whole time. Oh my God. Yeah. So you cried more with 2.
Yeah, and obviously part of it is like because I'm primed from the first one too. I'm so and there's other things. The girl in this movie is the age of my oldest daughter.
Right.
And now I've had more time with older girls as my daughters. So there's all that going on. And,
what was that like?
It was a combination of recognition, like, oh my gosh, yes, like that's a thing that I deal with, or that she might deal with. Yeah. There was a combination of that, also with, kind of fear for things to come, and also just the nostalgia factor. In fact, literally when they wheel out nostalgia, it's like, all those things really tugged at my heartstrings heavily.
So when you think about your oldest daughter being in her head and worried about impressing other people at school, maybe older class people, getting in her head and anxious about something, what do you observe? Did you see any parallels?
Yes, because, and granted, obviously I don't observe her all the time at her school or with new people that are her age, but I do with her friends, and then we also talk, and I see her, interacting with friends, and also some of the problems she sometimes will have with a friend. Sometimes they get in a little tiff or something, and
she'll tell you about it.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Okay. Well,
she gets very hurt about.
But the fact that she tells you about it is a huge thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That means you've cultivated that trust and that pattern.
That's right, because I threatened her that if she never told me about it, there'd be strict consequences.
Oh, you.
No, but yeah, and so I've seen these, and I've also seen the evolution. She's got this one friend where they've known each other forever, but it's kind of like, I wouldn't call it a love-hate thing. No, it's definitely lots of love. It's just that there's always been a dynamic where her friend eventually sort of reaches a point where she needs alone time, or she needs to, she needs a break. And it would hurt my daughter a lot for a long time. And then now she's sort of like adjusted to that, and she just bakes it into the equation of their friendship. And I didn't actively work on her on how to do that. She just kind of developed it over time. But you're right that I think talking about it must have helped her herself.
Yeah.
Because she talked to her mom, she talked to me, and over the years, she kind of arrived. Because the other day, something happened where it was one of those, I mean, they had spent a lot of time together, but then, it seemed like they reached a boiling point where they needed some time apart. And I was expecting her to be really devastated about it. But then when we talked about it, she was, of course, affected. But she was like, listen, I've been aware and dealing with this for years, and so I know that this is just a thing that happened.
She said that?
Yeah, she said that.
Wow.
So I was like, wait, well, never mind. And I'm sure it's still like, she's only 13, but like, it was really
still
interesting.
The way in which it's sort of like when your kid is 3 and they say a sentence that you just know they've never heard before, and they construct it completely on their own,
Right.
And it comes from their creativity and from their heart.
Right.
And you're just impressed, like, whoa, like you're this autonomous creature. And there's all these milestones, one of which is when your daughter says, yeah, look, my
this is old hat, Daddy.
Yeah.
It's funny. My
It's
youngest,
not my first time around this block. It's a thing. I've been dealing with it for years.
My youngest one, especially, she's 8, and she does a lot of things like that. Where I'm always like, where's she getting this stuff from? It used to be when she was little, it was just random phrases, but they were really funnily constructed random phrases. I remember one time we were downstairs and we were playing something or whatever, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she says, "Dip it on, Roger Bone." And I was like, what? And it sounded like a jazz term or something.
Yeah.
And we're like, what is that? She's like, I don't know. And it was so cool. All of us busted up laughing. And so that became a thing. It's like, dip it on, Roger Bone.
My nephew is like that. He's like a character, and he's kind of getting into that zone of feeling confident. Mm-hmm. He's 6 or 7, I think. And when we had our family reunion a couple months ago, we wrote another song. So we had a big family reunion 10 years ago, and just as a fun exercise or activity, we all wrote a song together. Like I asked for different chord letters and should it be fast or slow, and then collectively we came up with the lyrics, and I sort of pushed in a direction of a particular melody, and then it was one of the most funnest experiences. It's all on video. Well, we did it again this past summer because my mom really wanted to do it again.
Oh, cool.
And we were getting down to the end of the chorus, and I was throwing it out there of like, okay, who's got a good zinger for the end of the chorus? And I didn't know where it was gonna go. And the song lyrics were about like what we had experienced that week, like me pogoing off my head. That was part of it. But then my nephew, because he comes up with all this, he like has these weird, like what you're saying about your daughter, like these weird constructions that later on, once we're hemmed in by culture and by language principles and conventions, you would never come up with this. And he said, toots and my poots.
Toots and my poots.
So, poot and toot are both words for fart.
Right.
And so he's like, how about toots and my poots? And it doesn't make any sense, but it was perfect. And that's what we put in the song.
And it's a great ender for a chorus.
I did. It's
toots
in my poots.
That's awesome.
Anyway, so let's talk about Inside Out too. So I thought we would pause the audio and watch a couple clips just to kind of remind us of the story beats and also the working model of the mind that is being proposed, because they're adding to it. So let's pause and take a break, and when we get back, let's talk more about Inside Out 2. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. So we only got about 10 seconds into the movie before Berto said, ouch, that hurt. Which one was it?
The Family Island. So if you've seen the movie, you have all these like colorful animated islands, and then Family Island, it's still there, but it's this tiny little kind of like nice little shrine to the, the nuclear family.
Right. So in the first movie, when she's younger, she has 5 islands.
Yes.
She has Family Island, which is this wonderful,
awesome,
and each island has the same level of intensity, right? So you have Family Island and all these
Friends, Goofball.
So Friend, Goofball, Achievement, some sort of hockey or something.
Yeah, maybe.
And then Academics or Achievement or something. Anyway, and then we see now, and when I saw this, and I've now watched the movie like 3 times, and cried. I'll say though that the first one just makes me cry so hard, the entire movie. Anyway, but with Inside Out 2, you would think that, they're going to lean into the puberty thing, and a big part of the story arc is going to be about de-emphasizing the parents and emphasizing one's friends. That's like a common, at least American teenage trope. But they just skip over that whole thing, and right from the bat, at the beginning of the movie, they're like, nope, she's already, that ship is sailed, you know what I mean? That's not even going to be a part of the equation of this movie. That's gone now. Have you seen that transition?
Yeah, actually that started happening at 12, and I know it happens at different stages and stuff, but it was really weird. It's like, we had, a relationship where it's like, she's my little girl, blah, blah, blah. And then she's got a sister, but it's still like a lot of daddy time, a lot of, everything daddy says, like, we're going to listen, all these things. Okay.
Meaning that she would seek you out.
Yeah. And
she'd be like enamored with you, or...
And we would rarely butt heads over stuff. And then right around 11, it started a little bit, but then certainly at 12, it was like the biggest change. Like, we'd go on all these walks, and, it used to be we'd go on these walks, and I'd tell her stories that I wanted to tell her, and I would tell her about computers, and I would try to teach her.
And she'd listen. And she'd be interested.
And then what started happening is we started getting in fights during the walks, where she's like, can we just not talk, right? And I'm like... okay.
Okay, so what do you think that is? Because on one hand, you could interpret it in the negative way and say that she was enduring things prior to that and wasn't assertive. The positive side is that her preferences are changing.
Right.
Her loyalties are changing.
And I think it was more that. And actually that she would tell me. Because she wasn't like, can we just not talk because I hate listening to you? No, it was like, can we not talk? I use these walks to think. She would tell me, I use these walks to think, and I like just looking at things and kind of contemplating or something.
But in the past, when she's 10, was she just not that way, or what?
Well, we would just always just talk about stuff. So
she probably wasn't that way.
And she talked a lot,
okay.
So it wasn't just me. I mean, she still does, but... okay, and then here's the other thing that changed. And of course, this makes sense. When she's younger, she wants me to tell her stories. She wants me to talk to her about things. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden, and it was gradual, but it definitely started happening, where she wants to tell me things.
Yeah.
She wants to tell me about her day with her friends and what they did.
Yeah, I tend to see that like 3rd, 4th grade kind of time.
Right.
Like a quintessential 5th grade experience that I would have with a 5th grader would be that they would just want to tell me any story, regardless of its coherence or interest, or the 5th graders sit me down. Okay, so I saw this movie, and there was a dog, and then there was a car, and oh my god, like there was I have no idea what the movie is, but they're trying on this experience of I am now at the podium, and as my parent or my uncle or my therapist, you now have to just sit there and listen.
Exactly. And then what would happen is, so it'd go from like, oh, here, let me tell you about the history of computers. Like, can we not talk? Or hey, actually, I don't want, but I wanted to tell you about this thing that happened in my class with the, and then everything becomes about her and her friends and her experience. And of course, as a parent, I should be happy about that. But then there's that part of me that goes, but I wanted to talk. I wanted to be the center of your universe, not the other way around. And then also, then we started butting heads. I started trying to help her with math, and I love math, and so I'm like so excited. I'm like, oh, I get to help her. And actually, it didn't work well at all. At one point, she's like, I only want mom to help me with math. And it was like daggers through my heart, like, ah! But that was 12.
What sort of help? I mean, are they even in pre-algebra?
No, she'd be having issues with, like pre-algebra, stuff like that. And I was trying to explain things to her. And for whatever reason, in those moments, our personality differences and the age and stuff, it all came to a head.
Yeah.
And anyways.
And a part of that, one would hypothesize, is that developmentally, her loyalties and interests are naturally shifting.
That's right.
Maybe biologically or something. It's hard to know exactly why this happens, but a very common, and it's not universal, but a very common experience is that the kid is now really interested in friends and peers and what they're thinking and how they think about them and what it says about them and what their identity is, and much less concerned about I mean, they still need you. Right. They still love you. They still want you, but in a different capacity. They kind of want you, and you tell me from your perspective, but they want you to be on the sidelines watching and praising and absorbing and coming to the rescue when they need you, which is rare. Yeah. But they don't want you like
in their face. Yeah.
They don't want you like getting involved, because that means invasion. It means less of me having my identity. Plus, like, it is a wedge between them and these other kids, and that kind of thing. And they might even have some ambivalence and some hurt, some shame, some worry of like, ew, I'm rejecting my dad right now.
Right.
I don't know how I feel about that.
That could be. And then something someone else pointed out was that another feeling that could be there is she knows that I value, math and intelligence and computer stuff and all these things, right? And so someone was telling me that it's possible that subconsciously or maybe consciously or whatever, she might be like, it might cause her anxiety that she's, quote, not doing as well in that subject that I value, because that might mean that I think less of her or something like that. Who knows? But either way, a confluence of factors made it so that happened. Now, luckily what I have to report is, so we had a period of reset where like I would just kind of like avoid certain subjects, and I would just kind of like tell myself, okay, she still loves me, but it's like that one song, that 80s song, like, and know they love you. Don't you ever wonder why? If I told you they would cry. I don't know the lyrics, but it's something about that, right? Yeah. Well, then what flipped was we started finding new things in common and new ways to spend time together. Yeah. One of the things was we decided we were going to watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a series, and it was a little too late in the evening, and the little one couldn't watch it, so it would be like, the mom would be with the little one and I would watch, and it became our new bonding thing. So, now we're going on 5 seasons or whatever. Then the other thing is there's a video game that I love called Zelda, Zelda, and she started playing Zelda. And so we bonded over that. And so we just, we found new things. Oh, okay. And then in the summer she wanted to paddleboard, and then we started going paddleboarding, and
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of people listening would be jealous of that kind of relationship with their 13-year-olds, right? Yeah. Or a lot of people in the audience might have wished their dad would have adjusted and put that much effort and had the self-esteem, because that's the thing, like, if you don't got self-esteem, right, and your family island that you observe in your child is diminished to this tiny little altar, it's gonna hurt. And
I'm susceptible to that, because like, look, it sounds like I'm like all like Mr. I'm actually susceptible to feeling that way, because I have these narcissistic traits and things, and so it does hurt me if I feel like I'm all of a sudden not the center of attention, let alone for my little kids, my little babies, right? Even just this weekend, I was cleaning my closet, and I had this gift that I had bought for her that was supposed to be a surprise for Christmas. It's this nice Jungle Book art book that has like this beautiful like original cell drawings from the, and I love the Jungle Book and stuff. So I had it on the bed, but I had it upside down, and I put like a thing on top of it, and I didn't think anyone was going to come in the room. But at some point during the day, she did, and she saw the thing, and she like looked at the book. Later, I came in the room, and I saw the book was face up. I'm like, oh no. And I asked my wife, and she's like, oh, I think she was looking at it. I'm like, no. And my reaction was totally the bad reaction, because I was like annoyed. I was like, oh, why did she look through my stuff? Like, it was supposed to be a surprise for her.
Yeah.
But I came out of the room. I'm like, okay, listen, new rule. If I'm cleaning my closet, you don't go through my stuff, like all aggressive. And then we had a little tiff to the point where she's like, well, now you've ruined the surprise. You could have just wrapped it and not told me. So now I don't even care. And which hurt me. I'm like, she's so ungrateful. She doesn't care that I spent time buying her. So then I would go to the room, and then my wife luckily talked me down off the ledge. And then after I had to like swallow my pride of it, I finally came out, and I was like, all right, I'm sorry. You're right. It wasn't your fault. It's just and then it was fine. But I am susceptible to that. I'm susceptible to the little island.
Yeah. And drilling down of that, I think might be in order of what was, because as you say, it was a gift for her.
Yeah.
So if we work ourselves backwards through the maze and we see your display of anger and of discipline, I guess.
Yeah.
If we work ourselves back to the origin, what's the origin?
That's a really interesting question. Let's see. Okay, so I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, what do I value? I value surprises a lot. Like for me, the act of me surprising her is going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
So when the surprise is ruined...
What's below that? Like, what are you hoping for by putting effort
right,
into it?
Okay, that's the way I feel in which I can connect and deliver love to her.
You can show...
I can show...
that you love her.
That I love her because I put this effort to not just kind of like, here's a gift I bought for you, but actually I put effort into a thing you might specifically like, and then hiding the fact that and surprising you with it.
Right. So the foundation is I thought of you in advance, which I don't know if you have a problem with. Do you have a problem with... Is this like a teetering point for you of like thinking about people in advance and
No, I mean, for them, like I always make a huge deal. Like I always have these big elaborate productions with Easter egg hunts they have to do.
And your own history regarding like things, the sort of weird dichotomy between your mom showering you with gifts and your dad like taking them and selling them, And so for you to have this opportunity to show, and even though it's the recipient of that love is the one that ruined it, she still quote unquote ruined it. I'm putting it. She ruined your chance to show that you love her.
Yes.
And so
that's a great point. Yeah. Maybe that in that moment I'm hurt about the fact of like, well, now how do I show her I love her?
Right.
I'm just going to go get mad at her.
Yeah.
That'll show her.
Right. Yeah.
That's funny. I mean, it is funny and it isn't.
But we do this all the time, whether it's with our kids or...
And I related to that little small family island only in that what I was trying to say is I am totally susceptible to these like immature feelings about things. So definitely when that was happening, when she turned 12, right around that age, it hurt me, man. And I was not sure how to react to it. And that's why we butted heads on stuff. And,
Well,
and I'm sure that we'll go through more phases. 13 is not static.
Yeah. Well, there's going to be an Inside Out 3. So that I'm guessing will take place when she launches is probably my guess. When she leaves the house or when she goes to college or something, or has a long-term boyfriend. I don't know.
Ooh, yeah.
Or partner, because we actually don't know what her sexual orientation is, the protagonist. But anyway, so getting back to the model of the movie, so if we remind ourselves of what was established in the first one, is that you have these core memories each will produce one of these islands, right? These core islands. And one memory would be about family, right? And another memory would be about boy bands. Apparently there's a new boy band island.
Right.
And another memory about goofball, about having goofball experiences. What do you think about that model of how the mind works and the stable parts of our personality?
It was interesting. I found it fascinating in the first one because I had never personally thought about it. I'm sure it's, based on different schemas and whatnot. I'm sure you'd know about it. But for me, I had never thought of my mind or the mind model in this sense of like these. I certainly, because of my interest in AI and all these things, I had read and thought about this. I don't know if you've heard the term society of mind, where you have like these different bits and pieces in your brain all computing at the same time, and the net result is what looks like a personality, but in reality there's nothing. But what was so interesting to me is like, oh, okay, it kind of resonated with me. I was like, yeah, if I think back and I rewind to when I was little, especially, there were these things that were super critical. Mm-hmm. Star Wars Island was an absolute island for me. It was a real thing. Mm-hmm. It was so real, in fact, that, and I think we've talked about this, part of me when I was like 7, 8, part of me really felt that there was something real to Star Wars, like out there, like the Force was probably a real thing, like there's something very tangible. And I remember the wait between Empire and Return felt like I was waiting for the next chapter in the universe. Like it was this huge thing to me. So there was Star Wars Island. There was Lego Island. I absolutely had a Lego Island, I had cartoon, like Saturday morning Cartoon Island, and that one grouped together a lot of different franchises. Mm-hmm. And of course I had Dad Island, and I actually I had Dad Island separate from Mom Island because, but so it does make sense, mm-hmm.
And
I don't know that I only had 5. I probably had, 20 islands, but
yeah, you had your extended family.
Yeah.
You had your friends.
Yeah. But it does make sense. And each one of those things, you could have described how you felt about it and what it meant to you and what,
right. And it's interesting because the movie doesn't get into this, but like with you in Colombia and Bogota, there was a lot of political violence.
Yeah.
You lived in New York when you were very young,
right?
But when you come to Bogota, at least by the time you're 10 or something, right? Like that.
Oh yes.
There's violence and death and murder and uncertainty and coups and didn't your grandma like work in a government building and stuff? And so it's
so even at the age of 9, the Palace of Justice, which you saw this I think in Narcos and stuff, like it was invaded by the guerrillas who were being paid by the cartels to destroy.
It'd be sort of like if January 6th actually worked to
overthrow and to the point where the building was burned, people died, all these things. Yeah. My grandpa, whom you've met and drank drinks with, worked in that building.
Okay. So I don't know if the model of this movie would say this, but you could imagine having a core memory or a set of memories along these lines that would create an island of trauma and worry. The fact that your mom abandoned you, the fact that you were sexually abused.
Yeah.
Would there be an island? Would there be an island? Because the core memory of having been abused, like it would seem like that would really create an island of some sort.
Absolutely. So that's a really fascinating thing to point out because yes, you're right, and of course it's a nice Pixar movie, but the way they presented it is that at that point in the first movie, none of the islands were traumatic or negative. That was definitely not my experience. Mm-hmm. But I still like the metaphor of like these little islands that you could access, and they have, and actually in some cases, because you could take the metaphor further, the bridge to the abuse island was broken at that point. I didn't have a bridge to get to the abuse island. I wasn't really aware that the abuse island was there, but it was there. And years later, this pathway opened up to that island.
Yeah, I guess the metaphor would be that there's a bridge, like a synaptic connection is the way it kind of looks in the movie. But so I guess if we looked or confined ourselves to this model that is presented in the movie, other elements, just to rattle off other elements of the model, is that as the child develops from infancy in early infancy, different emotions start to emerge. And at first it's just joy, right? Which is a little weird because certainly the infants aren't only feeling joy all the time. I mean, anyone who's had an infant knows. And then even joy is kind of an overly complicated word for it. When you have a 2-week-old child, like, is it joy that they're experiencing or just like lack of annoyance?
Sure.
But anyway, then you get sadness and anger, and then later you get disgust and joy, sadness, disgust, fear. Fear. Which is interesting. So inside that too, there's anxiety, which is different from fear, which we'll get to in a second. But the core memory is an interesting concept, and in Inside Out 2, they get into more of what the way that I think people work, in that several memories will coalesce into what they were saying is a sense of self, right? Which we'll get into in a second. But in the first movie, it's more of one memory that is so important that it creates this island. And in the beginning of the movie, the core memories are all yellow, completely yellow, meaning that they're all joyous and happy. And one way of thinking about it is if things go well for a child, then the child is able to effectively keep sadness and negative experiences from entering into their stable personality. We have all these words in psychodynamic developments and around splitting and around the inability to see gray areas.
Yep.
And so a big part of her development is understanding that sadness isn't bad, and that a memory that has both joy and sadness can exist. In fact, it makes it more rich, it makes it more real, and sadness isn't just bad feelings, and that's the thing about Inside Out 1. It's just so, because it plays out in the plot.
I know.
They don't have to explain it. Like, they don't have, there's not like an exposition thing. No. They show us, and it feels real. Like when I'm watching Inside Out 1, I'm a little annoyed with sadness. I'm a sadness. Come on, man. Don't touch the core memories.
Stop touching. Oh my God.
What are you doing? And then the whole movie is this road trip and joy and sadness trying to get back. And the only reason why joy and sadness got kicked out of the control room was because joy was desperately trying to suppress sadness. Right? It's like, I can't have sadness. But and then you see in real life the protagonist going through this suppression of the sadness, right? Because she doesn't want to bother her parents, and she isn't being asked. She's not been given the space to be sad. She doesn't want to be a bummer. And so joy, in the attempt to keep the ship together, just screws it up, and then joy and sadness get sucked in. And then when joy and sadness are at this sort of critical point, and Joy's just like, look, either I risk us both not getting back, or I go back and leave sadness, because someone's got to get back there. And so Joy's like, screw it, I'm going. And then that doesn't work. Joy and Bing Bong and that whole crying thing.
Oh my God.
She gets back up, and then she's like, and some point she figures out, no, actually what she needs is sadness. She doesn't need joy. I'll start crying thinking about it. But when sadness, I'll start crying thinking about it. But when she's like, okay, you have the control panel, and sadness is like, okay, and she starts crying, and then the parents are holding her, and then it's healing. Sadness is very important. It's very helpful. It acknowledges our pain, and we cry and talk and signal to others, because in our pain we benefit from signaling it to people that we trust, because of the trustworthiness that's built, and have them just be there for us, just hold us, and to be joyful is to deny that, right? Is to displace the very needed part of that. So, and just a side note, so getting into Inside Out 2, there's this, moment where, and I love the writing of this, where Joy, as a voiceover, or she's explaining to somebody, I can't remember who she's explaining it to, but she's like, we've accepted that all emotions are good, even this guy. And she grabs sadness and she's like, even this guy, everyone needs all of the emotions, even sadness. And because a shittier writer would put it back to the beginning where joy and sadness are at odds again.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like in sequels, they often will do that. They'll just like in episode 9 when they just erase everything that happened previously because they don't have a creative bone in their body. And so they're like, let's just bring back Palpatine. Yeah. It's like progress forward in the story. So they did that. They're like, that's been established. What's a new conflict that can happen now? You know?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons. I don't know ultimately if it'll survive me giving it a 10 or whatever, but what I will say is I was so impressed that they were able to pull off a sequel to the first movie, because I gotta be honest, I was very skeptical. I mean, the first movie was so perfect, and I'm thinking, yeah, they can do more, but it's gonna be really hard to make it feel. And they did, they did manage to do that. And to your point, the writing was subtle. It wasn't obvious, like a rehash of the first movie.
Right.
It wasn't a rehash.
Right. And once again, there's no villain, really.
Yeah.
The first movie, there's no villain. The villain, you could argue, is joy.
Yeah.
But we identify with joy and we can see where joy is coming from. In the end, with Inside Out 2, anxiety is the enemy. But in the end, we can see that anxiety is trying to protect from future bad things. And that was interesting. So let's talk about that. But let's take a break first. What do you say?
Let's do it.
So I'm kind of all over the place, but I didn't really want to prepare an outline for this because of how much fucking work I did for the Elon deep dive. So I hope everyone's cool with that. So they have 2 emotional manifestations in the model of the mind, one fear, one anxiety. What are the differences between those two as they represent it?
Right. So, okay. So the fear, the way I saw it was fear is a little more primal, more basic, so like something any animal has, which is, either through my DNA or through my parents or my own observed behavior, I'm not going to go there because that might kill me, right? That's
like
pretty direct.
Like one of the first helpfulness manifestations of fear is when she's a toddler and she's running behind the couch and there's a cord, an electrical cord, a lamp cord. And fear is like, whoa, we're coming up on a cord. And then because she's running around and she stops.
Yes.
And then she gingerly steps over. And fear's like, we did it.
That's right. So it's almost like a more literal interpretation of the world, because it's like, okay, things that could actually hurt me, my body.
In the moment.
Like
it's
that, that ball could fall in my head.
Right.
That spider could bite me out. Whereas anxiety seems like this more abstracted, subtle thing where I learned from fear that I shouldn't go and touch and play with the spider. Okay. But now I have this generalized worry that spiders might attack me at night or something,
Right.
And now I can't fall asleep.
Right.
So now it's not that there's the real thing. It's more like, and then the spiders are really maybe not spiders. Maybe it's because of some bad interactions I'm having with my peers or whatever.
So in the biz, we might call this future tripping.
Yeah.
There's cognitive ideas, and it's interesting because in Inside Out 2, anxiety commandeers imagination. I don't know what that department was called, but
right. But that was so good because that's exactly right. It's like I am going to imagine these non-existing threats,
right,
and then start building on top of them.
Right. So anxiety has commandeered this office space in the mind. I'm guessing it was like creativity.
And they do all these sketches.
Yeah,
it's so cool.
And so anxiety's like, okay, everyone, I need everyone to come up with worst case scenarios.
Yeah.
Everyone, and so they were all drawing it out, and then anxiety be like, good job, that's one that we need to add to the list. And the idea was that prior to anxiety taking over, the imagination department could do a number of things, not just worry about worst case scenarios. Yeah. And, it's an interesting idea. And again, if I had prepped for this, I would have looked up research, and because we have been making models of the mind and emotion and theories of sense of self and schemas and core memories. There's various different models, and I have my own model of it. But if I thought about whether or not it's something that crops up developmentally around puberty, where anxiety, as we're defining it right now, is made more possible or something. Because, I'm just trying to think as I'm talking out loud, like, can a 7-year-old future trip? And I would say, yes, I did.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would lie awake at night. One of the worst things that my band director did for me when I was young was I was first chair trumpet, and that meant that if there was a solo, then I was to play that solo. And by solo, we're talking about like just hitting an E and a D and a C whole notes or something. You know what I mean? It was not like a full on jazz thing. It was just, but it was terrifying. And I'll never forget that my band director said, "Okay, you're going to do the solo at the big all district concert where all the bands and all the choruses from all the schools in elementary school get together. You're going to play the solo in 4 months from now or 3 months from now." And I worried every night about that upcoming solo. Although, maybe I was around that age, honestly. Maybe I was around.
Well, like, I can definitely relate to the differences between, like, some of these differences between the more concrete and the more abstract, in that, like, look, when I was in 4th grade, I remember this was a really important day for me, where I went over to have a play date at a friend's house. And the reason is, first of all, this was very uncommon. As you saw, I lived in a neighborhood that even back then was very commercial. I had no friends in my neighborhood, So the only way I could have a play date is for my dad to drive me pretty far, actually, to go to someone's house. So this was a thing that we planned. And I had brought with me my ninja costume that my grandma had bought me. Now, at that age, which I guess in 4th or maybe 5th grade or whatever, it's like, how old are you? Like 8 or 9 or something like that.
10.
I mean, around that age. Definitely, it was before 10. It was like maybe 9.
Okay.
Around that age, I'm wearing a full ninja gear out in the public park, and we're running around like idiots, right? No concern for what's the other emotion? The
ennui.
Ennui, no ennui, and no part of me remembers thinking, wait a minute, what if someone mistakes me for being like a criminal or something? And none of that weird stuff. Right. I'm just like lost in it. I might have been afraid of stuff, like more literal, but...
Yeah, I'm guessing that there are models, and there's a lot of research. I'm just, again, if I had prepped, I would have looked this up, about, is it true that future tripping and abstract thinking about the future is made more available naturally to kids as they enter those years, 10, 12, 14? Or is it that kids that are less traumatized are more likely to put that off? Because when you get older, you start actually realizing, wait, I'll be an adult soon, or wait, there's a lot of here consequences if I don't plan my outfit for later. There's a lot more insecurity. There's got to be some sort of weird confluence of a lot of, because it's not like the anxiety creates the insecurity or vice versa. It's like there's a lot of things that coalesce, at least in the typical mainstream American developmental phase of entering, 13, where you're insecure, you start future tripping, you start thinking about the future, you stop depending on your parents. You might even not want to reach out to them. You want to be your own person, and you start thinking about sexuality, and you're really concerned about how you look. But yeah, it is true. Like when you're younger, hopefully you have the freedom to just be completely goofy and smell and look however you look, and you just don't really care.
But and then the other thing that starts happening is you have more experiences which shape you. Because as an example, I've told this before, where for one Halloween, I decided I was going to be Aquaman. And I had this cool long sleeve orange shirt that was cool, and I had green sweatpants, Adidas green sweatpants, and I had green underoos which I wore on top of my sweats. And that's how I went to school. And I was probably eight years old, maybe 9, whatever. And I went to school, thought that was totally fine, got made fun of the whole day. So then that changed my perspective about what I can and can't wear. So, these experiences also shape you.
Yeah.
And I was still little enough to where the fun wasn't that. The fun
Did you
that was
have
made
underwear
was like,
underneath? Did you have?
I don't know.
Do you know what I mean?
I don't remember. But I do know that I definitely had the underoos on top. But in my mind, it only made sense. The superheroes all wear underwear on the outside.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and then you learn. Yeah, like when there's moments that are in the movie Inside Out 2 that remind me of things that happened to me, because a good portion of the movie is the protagonist. I'm forgetting her name, but anyway, the hero of the story. She is at hockey camp and not at home, and she's trying to make the team. It's a camp that is to teach the younger kids, but every now and then there's a star younger kid who is asked to join the big girl team, and if you that's a big deal, and it's super cool, and you start getting trained so that you'll be like really good by the time you're older. And there's this, I can't remember what moment it is, but it reminded me of this one moment was such a big deal to me. It was at our graduation party. So we just graduated, and I don't know about other parts of the world or country, but in our neck of the woods, maybe you can tell me if you did this at Lakes, that we would have our graduation ceremony, and it'd be usually like on a Friday, I think.
Okay.
It's a big deal. You got the robes and all the parents and the grandparents, and then from the ceremony, all the kids get into a bus and they take us to this like mystery all-nighter party. Like my school always did this with did your school do this?
We had an all-nighter senior party.
Yeah.
But first of all, it wasn't a mystery. It was just like it was an all-nighter party. I think it was the day of the graduation, but I can't be sure.
Okay. So yeah. I'm guessing that it's not something that is always...
Yeah.
I've heard from people on other parts of the world that say that they wish that their high school culture was like America's, the United States, because we have a lot of these like, homecoming dances
and celebrations.
Yeah, there's all these like high school, teenage cultural things that go back decades, you know what I mean?
Right. And when you grow up watching American media, which is all around the world, you see those things.
Yeah, and you're just like, we didn't even have, they just said you're done, and we just went home, Anyway, so we had this all-night party, and, of course, as far as I know, everyone's sober. I would later find out that a number of my friends were completely wasted the entire time, but not close friends, but people that anyway. And Depeche Mode, there was a dance portion, and there was a DJ, and Depeche Mode came on, and I love Depeche Mode, so it's 1989, and I'm you're getting a little punchy at like 4 a.m. in the morning. Sure. And I like pop up and I look to my friends and I'm like, DM, and there's this girl, a girl I grew up with from kindergarten, a girl that I've known the whole time. Her and I were never super close throughout.
Well, I know which part of the movie you're thinking of. Go ahead.
Okay. She goes, DM and mocks me. Yeah. I'm not even talking to her. I'm talking to my friends, like my 10 friends.
It's that moment in the movie where that literally happens about the band she likes.
Right. Yeah, that was it, right.
Yeah.
She's like, oh my God, I love that. And they're like, you like that band? Yeah. She's like, and then Ennui steps up to the control, and she has her app, which I think is just so great. And she's like, yeah, I really love that band. Right. So in that moment, I have an enthusiasm, and I'm not future tripping, and I'm not insecure, and I'm not second guessing everything. Yeah. I'm just me with my friends. DM, and I'm the opposite of cool, right? I'm being giddy and excited and enthusiastic and happy, which is the opposite of I'm not going to say her name, but I remember her name. And later, it's funny, I shouldn't give details, but she became what we would all call a quintessential hipster. I'm sure she's a good person, but in that moment, she was...
meaning is the hipsters like, I was into this before anyone else, that thing?
Yeah, I don't know, but she looked like the sort of person that would still roll her eyes at people that would like
I see.
Katy Perry or something, you know what I mean? Someone's just like, oh my God.
But there's a big, no, because like Depeche Mode, if I understand what you're getting at, it would be like, I liked Depeche Mode 6 years ago. I can't believe you're still into Depeche Mode.
That's basically what she was saying.
That would be the single most uninformed Depeche Mode fan in history, considering what album came out that year. But okay.
But to her, it was old news, and really anything that was in top 40 radio would be extremely eye-rolly to her.
Sure.
And I'll just never forget it, because it was so... It just felt like I was cut away at the knees, because it's like I'm not even talking to her. I'm talking to my friends, and I'm not bothering her. And she, out of disgust, right? She's just like, and I didn't put the song in, right? I didn't drag her to the party. Right. What did I do to you? I'm like, DM, let's go dance. Yeah. And she's like, DM.
Oh my!
And maybe because she's making fun of the fact that I had abbreviated it or something. But me and my friends, we abbreviated everything. It was part of our stupid little language. But anyway, it really just felt really. Because it felt like it didn't feel like it was just one person having a moment. It felt like a wave of older kid culture or something, this it felt like it had power behind it,
I see.
It felt like I was bumping up against a reality that I should have already known about. I shouldn't have been in a place where I would have this excitement or like this thing. It suddenly, for the first time, made me wonder if my love for Depeche Mode was stupid.
Oh, that's so sad. Oh my God.
You know what I mean? Am I stupid? Am I stupid for not, for like, and honestly, most of my classmates didn't like Depeche Mode. It was too weird.
That's
what I mean? So
weird.
I already felt like I was alternative, but I wasn't alternative enough.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's funny. Like I look back to high school, and there's all these ways in which I had insecurities, and but when it came to music, that was the one area of my life. I don't know if it's the one area, one of the probably few areas in my life where I was completely secure with my tastes. And I didn't care that I was the only one pumping chess one night in Bangkok to the football game where everyone's like, what is this song? I'm like, it's the best song in the world. Whatever. I just had my tastes. I was perfectly happy with them. Me and my friend Ty at all the dances.
What were you insecure about?
Oh, basically...
What could have some hipster in 1991 have said that would have cut you off?
The way I looked, the way I would have maybe approached a girl to talk to her, like the way I would have.
But that's not like a fashion or a.
No, the way I looked would have been right, like like the things I was wearing or whatever. I guess it was all internal. I think anyone that knew me back then would probably have not realized that I had a lot of insecurities.
Oh, yeah. But I don't think people would realize now.
I did.
Maybe the fact that people would be racist that you were from Colombia.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Stuff like that. In fact, I was just talking to someone about this the other day, that I didn't realize how much all that stuff was happening in my head and how much I was being affected by it. Because my joy was covering up a lot. She was working overtime.
Well, it's interesting. If we think about the 9 emotions that are in the protagonist's brain, your version of ennui, because you were not ennui, I'm guessing.
No, not at all.
But you had an ennui, but it just had a different name, and it was...
Well, actually, no, I did have... But it wasn't ennui, right? It was
jokester.
Well, no, but I definitely had disdain. So I had a disdain.
But I'm saying in terms of the person that would save you from uncoolness.
Oh, yeah.
Was the jokester, which is different from joy.
Yeah.
Because you're not feeling joy.
That's true.
When you're going along with the racist jokes.
Yeah. That's a fair point. Yes.
So there's this individual adopted emotion that only some people needed. That's kind of interesting to think about, right?
Yes.
That for some people, everyone would have a different defense. That was actually one of the criticisms I would have. I mean, it's stupid because it's just a Pixar movie. But when you think about the 9 emotions, all of them make sense as emotions except for ennui. So you have joy because the thing about emotion is you have a stimulus like a perception, and then it evokes an automatic emotion that we don't have control over. So when you see something that makes you feel like laughing, you have joy. When something hurts, you don't have control over it, you get sad. When you're like, oh, there's a saber-toothed tiger, you get worried. When there's broccoli come at your face, you're like, ew, that's disgusting. And when you are being trampled on, your rights are being trampled on, you get angry. Well, when you have these concerns as you age about the future, you need to start future tripping to some extent because planning is important for better or for worse. And when that can get out of control, it's anxiety. So maybe like a word for anxiety would be like anxiety / planning or something. You know what I mean? Like future awareness so the future, but that's a process. It's not emotion. Anyway, so anxiety has to do with that future tripping. Yeah. And then you had the big guy who was embarrassment, right? Which is something that also is not controllable, right?
That's the I'm embarrassed now that I wore the underoos over my sweats,
right? Or I yelled at DM, and I'm now embarrassed. Who else? Because that was another part of it. I remember thinking, wait, am I making a fool in front of and I was 18, so I wasn't like extremely insecure, but it was humiliating enough, Anyway, so there's embarrassment, and then you have envy, which is something that you could argue is an emotion and something that you can't have control over. But ennui, I would argue, is not an emotion, it's a defense, right? Maybe you could say that more fundamentally ennui was shame or something, and the way it dealt with, because like with anger, you wouldn't say that you wouldn't call anger
rage,
or hostility, right? You wouldn't call it fighting.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean? So ennui, I had a little bit of a problem. Like, well, that's not
reaction.
That's not really because we don't naturally feel unless you would argue that the ennui, but that's not really the way it was portrayed. Would be provoked when you just have like thoughtful angst about existence or something, or about like demoralization, or
maybe it does work though, because you need a word, right? And ultimately the feeling is I don't care.
But that's not so that would be depression, like truly, but
in the extreme, right?
But we understand that teenagers, when they say I don't care, whatever, they are the opposite. They deeply care, but they're saying they don't care because that's a defense. It's not really how they feel. The fact that they're saying whatever is evidence of them feeling too much.
I don't know. Like I hear what you're saying, but there's also that part of like, I really couldn't care less right now. That. Yeah. So not that other one, but more like.
But that's not an emotion. That's just a recognition of lack of emotion. I'm indifferent to that thing. But we understand that ennui would come to the fore, like with that music.
I think
that's
what
not
happens,
something that she wasn't literally having ennui for that band.
No,
she was defending.
No, you're right about that. That's true. She inside wasn't feeling I don't care.
Right.
She was feeling shame or embarrassment.
She really cared.
And the reaction was the ennui, the impersonation of the ennui.
Right.
So I still would call it, I would still be fine if there's an emotion called ennui. But you are right that in that moment, she wasn't feeling ennui.
No.
Right.
Right.
Okay. fair enough.
But I think it's hilarious, though.
But it is hilarious
that she's French, you know. And
because in a lot of the other cases, it does work. Like the anger, if anger takes over the console and then reacts out of anger,
right?
That worked because she was feeling anger.
Right.
In this case, she was feeling embarrassment.
Yeah, I mean, because
it might have been made more sense.
Right.
If it's like, imagine if...
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. If it's embarrassment, but there's already embarrassment.
No,
but maybe shame, like deeper, you know?
It could be, but even with just those, you can imagine the scene where embarrassment goes like, let me take over, right? Like, let me take over, and looks over at Ennui. Ennui, why aren't you doing something? Anyways, let me, or something like that. Yeah. But either way, it was funny. It was funny.
I mean, because if we look at all of the defenses employed by the protagonist, like hiding one's emotions, right? But there wasn't a physical manifestation of hiding one's emotions. There was a process involved in that.
It's an interesting identification there that it is true that they start mixing the metaphors.
Yeah, which is fine. But I'm just saying. Okay, so let's take another break, and then we get back. Let's talk about their model of sense of self. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. By the way, so we're recording this a little bit after having our big Halloween party.
Oh,
at our house.
So good, by the way. Thanks for inviting us as usual.
Yeah, it was so much fun. Yeah, it was maybe one of the funnest one that we've had. And, after everyone leaves around 10 or 11 or something, I've had a couple drinks. And so I want to do something instead of just go to bed. And so I started watching movies, and I watched Inside Out 2 again, partially because I knew we were going to talk about it, but also I watched Toy Story 2.
Oh.
Because I had thought recently that of the Toy Story franchise, I think 2 I might have only seen a couple times, once when it came out.
Yeah, that might be true for me too, actually.
Right, because 1 you have to revisit every now and then. 3 is such
the best.
It's so, it's so epic, but 2, it's like, and rewatching it, I mean, it's not like mind blowing, but they really were creative in making a sequel that made sense in world, added to the world, but also kept it pretty crisp and tight.
I'm trying to remember.
So he is stolen, he is stolen by a collector who wants to sell him as part of a set.
Oh, this is when we meet her and the horse and the Now I know. Okay, yeah. I love that one. That's a really
Stinky
good one.
Pete.
Yes.
I mean, it's real crisp, and the twists of Stinky Pete being the villain. If sorry for
spoilers,
and the action sequence when they get stuck in the airplane, and it's very quick, and they don't linger, and it makes sense, and they incorporate Buzz into the story because it's mainly about Woody, but Buzz gets in there, and they get another Buzz from the shelf who still has that delusion.
The Latin, isn't this the Latin dance mode or whatever?
Oh, maybe.
Doesn't he because he loses his memory for a bit and they have to reset him? And he goes,
I think that might be a different one, but
okay.
But he
the Buzz they get is like he's on the mission.
Yeah,
he's not a toy.
He still believes the same way that Buzz originally did, and. It was sort of like that scene in Infinity War where Captain America meets a different Captain America, him in the past.
Oh, yes.
And the older Captain America is just like, oh my God, was I this insufferable? It's like, relax.
Right.
Come on, take the stick out of your ass. It's just that kind of scene. But anyway, so getting to the sense of self. Okay. So in the movie Inside Out 2, they elaborate. And you could argue that one's sense of self does the ability to have a sense of self doesn't develop until later in life. Again, if I did research, I would have a lot of bullet points and research and models and, because and markers of development. I don't got that.
We don't got that.
I don't have that today. I'm just speaking off the top of my head because I just wanted to have a good time with Birdo.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Yeah, anybody got time for that. Prep, anybody have got. But what do you think, bro? So in terms of, okay, well, let me lay out the hypothesis that they're putting forth is that with enough memories that go to a certain part of the psyche, because, memories are created in short term in the control room.
Yeah.
Right. Then when the protagonist sleeps, then all of those memories get dumped into long-term memory and they go into the back of the mind. Some of those memories go on those normal shelves, right? That can be recalled, sort of like a library system of just like, hey, we need a jingle, or we need a memory to, or what's the answer to that test? That would be in long-term memory. But there's another layer of even further back of memories that are more formative, I'm guessing, and they are floating in this dark pool. And with enough memories in a particular direction, they will coalesce into an idea that manifests in the control room.
That's a belief, right?
They call it the sense of self, because the core beliefs are those 5 things that create the items.
Oh, right.
And then the sense of self in the beginning is, I'm a good person. And the way that it's stated is and it's interesting because the way that they portray it in the movie is our 5 emotions. They don't have any control at all over that sense of self. Like that is something that when they hear it talking, that sense of self, that like glowy thing that it's sort of like a Christmas ornament or something. It has the voice of the girl.
Right.
It's not a different, it's not like anger or.
And that was new. Right at the beginning, they introduced. Now she's developed a sense of self.
Right.
Yeah.
I am good.
Right.
It's not just I'm good. It's like I am good. It's a very resolute.
That's right.
Confident, backed up idea of the self. I am good. I think that's what it was. Something like that.
Yeah.
And then with anxiety affecting things. Then and the experiences that she's having where she's screwing things up, she's not good enough, then it emerges into a new sense of self that says, I'm not good enough or something, I think it is.
Yeah, something like that.
Something along those lines, right? Yeah. And the self in this movie cannot have a sense of self, or because in I'll get into my language in a second, but is it true for you, Berto, that around 12 you started to have the capacity to have that psychic function of this is me as defined by all of these experiences? There is a me, whereas prior, when you're 5 or 7, you don't really have that ability?
I don't know, because I feel like I have memories going back to very, very young, like 4, maybe even 3, certainly 5, for sure 5, because those are the New York memories that are so imprinted in my brain, where I had a sense of self.
How do you know?
All right, so I'm thinking about it this way. At like age 5, I have distinct memories of beliefs I had about myself that I felt I would have called a sense of self.
Like what?
It was, like I said, I love Star Wars.
Wow.
And I love dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
And I love singing.
Okay, so let me ask you. There could be a difference between I love Star Wars and I am a guy who loves Star Wars.
Absolutely. Right. So let's tease that apart. Absolutely. But so if you ask little Berto, like little 5-year-old, like, who are you? I might say like, oh, I'm someone who, or, I love Star Wars and I love dinosaurs.
I love turtles.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Now when I think about like 12, 13-year-old Berto, and now I'm thinking about this because that's 8th grade. That is 8th grade. And that is, oh, yes, this makes some sense, because at that age, I had become a programmer, and I was good at math, and so then that's interesting. It's not just like I like math; it's I'm good at math, and I am a good programmer. In fact, I am very, like it's true. It's like, now maybe the 5-year-old would have said, I know a lot about dinosaurs, maybe, but definitely there's a little bit of a difference between I like Star Wars, I like dinosaurs, to like I'm good at math.
Yeah, I'm remembering enough of my studies regarding the development of the self and the psyche and different stages to know that there are elements of this that tend to play out when you ask people and you sort of test it, right? Certainly it's not like all of a sudden one can have that, but it is an abstraction of the self, right? When you are 5, you would notice in an abstract way, but it's at a basic level of abstraction of, I like Star Wars, whereas if you're just liking Star Wars, that's one level of experience.
Yeah.
But the ability to reflect on the self and say, ooh, I like Star Wars. And then there's an abstraction further away from that of, I'm the sort of guy that likes Star Wars.
Yeah.
Or I am seen, and it's this ability to zoom further and further out from the self, looking at the self and defining the self.
Okay, so there's a great example in 2nd grade where, and this is another one of these things emblazoned in my mind. So in 2nd grade, I was quote unquote boyfriend and girlfriend with this little girl, and no one knew. It was a secret. Then,
was that her idea?
I just think both of us didn't.
I'm joking.
Oh, I see you. No, I think both of us were embarrassed because at that age you don't really.
Yeah.
So like it was just our little secret. Okay, but then someone started a rumor that she had a boyfriend or something like that.
Oh, I think you told me this story.
I was terrified.
Yeah.
That they would find out it was me.
Didn't you hang her out to dry?
I did. I accused this other little boy, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's Raymond," and they're like, "You like Raymond? You love Raymond," and it was devastating. Of course, that was the end of our relationship. Number 1. Number 2, I felt so bad. I had to go apologize to her, of course. But here's what I remember thinking to myself, because I was very, I was very Catholic and Christian at the time because my grandma had taught me all these things. So I remember literally in my head going, "Wait, so are you a bad person then? Like, do you realize this is not okay with like God? Are you a bad person?" I remember having that discussion. So I was like, I gotta go apologize. This is gonna suck, but I gotta go do it.
Yeah.
Because it was like me being like, I gotta prove to myself that I'm not a bad person. Okay. But it was still very transactional, right? Like one action will prove or disprove whether I am or not. Right?
Yeah. I think one could say that the sense of self, as we're defining it in this discussion, is a lot more distant and is called upon less often.
Yeah.
And is a lot more black and white.
Right.
As the movie kind of depicts in a different way from, the first movie of having an inability to see grays, you know what I mean? But also is way more up in the air, right? Like, because when I think about for myself, I don't know if I ever talked about it. There are 2 moments that I think about when I was like 3rd grade-ish. One moment was when I think I might have discovered that, for boys' underwear, briefs, because back then, everyone, whether you were, 3 years old or 90 years old, you wore tighty whities.
Yeah, that was the thing.
Boxers, as far as I knew, didn't exist,
Right.
at least in Seattle.
Yeah.
And
unless you were wearing underoos, which were tighty whities with different colors.
So I just missed underoos.
Oh, okay.
And I was so jealous of my little brher.
I see.
Who's more along your age.
Yeah.
Because suddenly there was all of this stuff that was oriented towards children. I remember thinking that, I'm like, where was this in the 70s?
Right.
Because, nothing was oriented towards me. TV wasn't, you had like Comedy Central and like the Transformers and maybe not Comedy Central.
Saturday morning cartoons, which were awesome.
But by the time you would have been like 5 or 6, the after school programming of cartoons was elaborate. You had He-Man, you had like Transformers, you had G.I. Joe, and I would watch those, but I was a little too old for it, you know? And, you know, in the 70s, when I got home from school, it was just like soap operas and news and shit.
Leave it to Beaver.
We didn't even have that, really. Yeah. I mean, there was... anyway.
Yeah, they weren't even showing those reruns yet.
Yeah, anyway, so everyone's wearing underwear, and I don't know if I just discovered it or what, but I figured out that when you pee, you're supposed to put your penis through
the little gap.
Through the flap. There's like a little... like... for those who aren't aware, they're like if you had those old school sandwich bags that don't have a Ziploc, they just sort of fold over. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
you could put your penis in the sandwich bag.
Yeah. And so I remember I decided that I was going to pee like that.
Yeah.
And I thought it was, I don't know, maybe I thought it was like an older person thing or something.
Like, oh, now I can do this.
Yeah. And I thought, you know what? I distinctly remember I'm walking around just privately in my own head at recess saying, I am now the kind of guy that uses the underwear flap. That was so funny.
Did you lift the flap?
Yeah. Oh boy, did I. And I remember thinking how it felt to adopt, like on purpose, because I could make a choice. Like I can decide who I am. Now, fast forward 24 hours, and I had abandoned the flap because it's fucking annoying. I still don't use the flap, and I don't wear boxers. I briefly wore boxers. I'm very much used to the brief thing, and you know. I'm sorry if this is I'm sorry if this is TMI, but I don't it's extremely inconvenient to use that flap. In boxers, there's usually just an opening, which is just a lot easier, but with anyway. So
I pull them down but from the back and I kind of tuck down in and then like lean, kind of lift one leg, and then it's so convenient to do it that way.
Yeah. Chicago style. That's what we call it.
Yes.
So the second time was my dad had this huge bottle of cologne or aftershave or something that he didn't want anymore, presumably because he gave to me. Mm-hmm. And I had seen from the commercials that you fill your entire 2 hands and you splash it on your face. So that's what I did before school.
Oh my God, dude.
And everyone was like, what is that goddamn smell? And I'm like,
what age?
Yeah, and I never.
How old were you?
Probably like second grade or something. And on the way to school, I'm thinking, I'm a cologne guy.
I'm
I'm adapting this this sense of who I am. This like voluntary definition but then very quickly. So it's like when you're pre-13, you could argue. There are moments, but they're more fleeting, less necessary, and not as solid, because by the time you're 13, 14, 15, you've really started to figure out your identity. That's the whole thing. Like,
and like you said, it's not one moment. Because, for example, when I moved here at 15, I didn't see myself as a musician at all. That wasn't part of my persona. I loved music. I loved singing. But if you had asked, like, who are you? Like, I wouldn't have said, I'm a musician. No, I would have never said that. But when I met my band and I met my friends and they invited me in the band and then I started playing music, then I would have said, I'm a musician.
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't start playing music and writing music until I was about 17-ish or maybe 16, but later on. And yet in my journal, there are little doodles of me in a band with my friends.
Oh, wow.
Who are musicians, but I'm not a musician except for trumpet, which doesn't really go very far in rock and roll or pop music of the 80s. And I identified as a band member before
you were in
I was even in a band. It's kind of funny.
That is funny.
But I didn't know what to do to create a band. Anyway, so one could argue that the model of the movie Inside Out 2 is consistent with the way that we experience things in a sense, right?
Yeah.
But it is interesting how they have two metaphors. They have one which is the core memories that create the islands, and there's another metaphor which is this sense of self that is based on not core. The core memories were they were individual memories, which is a bit of a problem because you can't have just like one memory or one experience that would create it. In terms of how the movie works, it makes sense to just kind of do it that way. In terms of the way that I see humans, the second movie is more consistent with how I think people work, where a lot of memories work together to create a schema or a sense of you could, so let me talk about sense of the self. So I've talked about this before, that in our field there's not a super consistent definition of sense of self, but the most common is that when we are given enough attunement growing up from 0 to 5 and enough safety to explore our emotions and our needs and how we feel about things, what we want, then we get in connection with the self. We get in connection, and so having a connection or having a sense of self typically means that you know generally what you are feeling, what you want, and what your needs are. What do I want? What am I feeling? And what do I need? And for some people who haven't been given that sort of attunement during that critical phase of development, they could be 45 and really not know what they're feeling and what they need. And therefore, they don't know what they need, because what you need is based on emotion. And you don't know what you want because you don't know what you need. And you don't know what you want because you don't know how you feel. And you're having emotions. You have a self. And that's why I will use the phrase a connection with the self. Because people will say, I don't have a sense of self, or I don't have a self. They'll say that phrase. And I will counter by saying, you do have a self, you're just not in connection with it. You have all those things.
Right.
You have emotions, you have needs, you have wants, you have urges, you have preferences, but you've never been given a social, attuned environment to give you the practice. And so when there are young children, the way that we will naturally help kids to figure this out is when they have an emotion, we will communicate somehow to that child what we are observing in them. Under the best of circumstances, it's very overt, and we'll say like, oh, you look very happy, or you look very sad, or you look angry right now. But more commonly, it's just contextual, the way that parents tend to react to us, Like if we're raging and we're like breaking things, and our mom is like, her face looks kind of scared or aghast, and she's running over and she's like, what are you doing? There's sort of an emergency. And you being, 12 months old or 18 months old, you're just like, oh, what was happening there? Because when you're that young, you don't understand that you have different states, that you have different emotional reactions. You're just in the moment.
Oh yeah.
You don't have an abstraction about yourself and about emotion, and when you're angry, the world is anger, and when you're sad, the universe is sad, and I'm just a part of that, right? Yes. But as we age, we're like, oh, there's a me who is feeling an individual experience of an emotion that is not representative necessarily of the universe. Like there are other people who have other emotions, mentalization and, theory of mind and all that kind of stuff, and differentiation. Anyway, so really what they're modeling in Inside Out 2, it's close to a sense of self, or it's close to, but what it is more representative of is a schema or a working model of self. If people follow my talk or they follow attachment theory, John Bowlby and others, as we are in our families, as we're being raised, we learn, okay, what is me and what is other? Can I trust others? Are others safe? Am I a good person? Am I fun? Am I lovable? These are all questions that we are very curious about and are continually getting data to answer those questions, and we emerge into later childhood and adulthood with a working model of self and other. And so you could argue that this like Christmas ornament thing is a working model of self. I am good. I am not good enough. Right?
Yeah.
And it's in relation to experiences that have become seminal or important to that sense of who am I. I guess if I were, an advisor on the movie, that's probably what I would have preferred them to use, is working model of self, because sense of self, I think audiences understood what that meant, right? They didn't have to do a lot of exposition or really hardly any at all. They're like, oh, sense of self. Okay. I am a good person. I have a sense of myself but in terms of language in my field, working model of self, I think people would understand that phrase. And then, and maybe that'll be the second movie or the third movie will be working model of others. I don't know.
I definitely
more empathy involvement or something.
I think that the problem is that no one, everyone uses the word emotion. Everyone uses the word self, maybe even sense of self, but working model is not
that's not a
common thing.
Okay,
so that'd be the issue. Now, they could still bring it up, but it's just, I think that one of the beauty of the first movie especially, but also the second one to a certain extent, is that they managed to still pick metaphors that were relatable.
Yeah.
And so it's hard. It's hard to get it accurate.
Yeah.
One thing I was just thinking about is how over the years, even as an adult, there was chapters where my sense of self, and of course, there's no duh, it keeps evolving. For example, in even trivial ways, like in my late 20s, early 30s, I was still enamored of collecting random things that were cool. So there was a point in 2005 where I got rid of like a garage full of stuff that I had. And what was it? Well, it was all sorts of things that I had bought and I had gotten as gifts that were collectibles. Lots of cool like action figures, things, even Star Wars toys and stuff like this. But it had gotten to the point where I was like, why do I have all this stuff? Like, I'm not playing with it. I'm not doing anything with it. And over the year, and it took me a long time, but over the years, I started refining what it is that I actually valued, to the point where nowadays I have this one shelf at home where I have like a little shrine of the things that I really love and care about. And it's very rare for me to add a new thing in that shelf.
Yeah. You have He-Man.
Yep.
And the Sandman. And Star Wars. And I don't know, you're talking about the Beatles and stuff? Okay. And then
I have a little bit of a DC, like Superman, Batman area.
Okay.
And then at the very top, I have some comic books that are like first issue comics. And then I have one area that are some of my favorite books, like Edgar Allan Poe stuff, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Bret Easton Ellis, couple books, Isaac Asimov, a few things. But it's only like one shelf. Now I do have more stuff more books in other shelves, but that is my collection shelf, and it's just one of those things. Like my sense of self evolves, and then at some point I'm like, to what you were saying before, I am someone who values the Beatles, right? So that's part of my sense of self. But
I want to value that you're saying, but what the movie is getting at is more fundamental to that. It's more, am I a good person?
Sure. Yeah.
And how do people see me?
Yeah.
Am I worthy? Am I lovable? Am I safe? These kinds of things.
I guess though, I'd like to maybe go one level deeper. It'd be something along the lines of, I don't know how to phrase it properly, but it's, I am someone who has specific interests or something like that,
Well, everyone does.
No, but like for a while I didn't. For a while I was just like, I'm someone who has lots of interests.
Okay.
And then it evolved to, I'm someone who has specific interests. And it's an valuable realization, because then it allowed me to, I'm not going to buy that because I don't need that. That's not something I need.
Yeah.
And it allowed me to get rid of things. Like, I can donate this. I don't need this thing.
Right.
Whereas before it's like, well, no, I like all these things, right? I am someone who likes all these things.
Yeah. And another, and of course, this would just make it more complicated, but if the way that I see this aspect of our psyche is that it doesn't toggle the way that the movie was suggesting, that and maybe you could argue that and maybe this work, as I'm thinking through this, that pool had a lot of different types of memories that could coalesce into a single, as they put it, sense of self. And maybe consciously it's like, well, what is the most present self that is sensed right now? Because it went pretty quick from, after a whole life, or after many years anyway, of I'm a good person, to suddenly I'm not good enough. And it just needed to highlight those memories in the pool that were in support of that idea. But another way of seeing it is that we have a number of these ornaments in the psyche, some stronger than others, and all of them have different memories and experiences and interpretations that contribute to that ornament. For example, people that have low self-esteem, they might have a big ornament that's like, I am not good enough. But that's not the whole story. There's probably another smaller element that says, I am good enough. I do have strengths. So I wonder how that would look in this metaphor.
Wow. And also the amount of awareness the person has about those things. For example, I think back to like when I turned 30, or right around that time, where a new belief came into being that I was not consciously aware of. And the new belief actually probably was there the whole time, but it became this sense of self that was, I am not lovable, or no one might love me, or something like this. But it wasn't something that I heard expressed in my brain literally.
Right.
I didn't go, no one might love me.
Right.
But it was there, and it made me depressed, and I didn't realize it.
Yeah.
But before that, it was probably there, like hiding in the shadows. But before that, the I'm lovable, I'm fun, I'm all these things was a lot more loud and prominent. And all of a sudden, that kind of gets relegated, and there's something else, and I don't know what it is, and maybe it's a little muted, like what, but it affects you. And then it was luckily in my case not a permanent sense of self, because then through therapy and friends and love and other things, it got adjusted. It got like, other pieces got added, and it became something more like, I am at risk of fearing not being loved, but I am loved.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah.
And the way that the climax of the movie is depicted, I thought was pretty interesting too. Okay. So we just rewatched the scene, and I'm glad that I did, because I had forgotten some bits here. Was that she is having anxiety, and Joy intervenes. And
you pointed out that one thing that was important is, for the whole movie, especially the first part, we had seen that Joy, meaning well, had been flinging problematic things.
Right. We need to. It's sort of an asterisk, and I'm trying to remember the exact point of this. Was that you could argue that the whole is that what they're trying to say? So the mechanism is that Joy created a different suppressive mechanism aside from keeping the control panel away from sadness. She just had it was not relegated to just sadness. It was just like, let's suppress these emotions.
Yeah, these emotions
or these memories. So she would take these bad experiences, and she had this real janky sort of tube that she had constructed herself, and she would fling these memories not only into long-term memory, but beyond long-term memory. And that's where a lot of this sense of self, I think, was being created. It was like further back in the psyche.
And I think the metaphor would be, memories that are suppressed as we're growing up, either literally suppressed or just because, like in my case, there's a lot of bad things that I would never claim, at 22, all of a sudden this flood of memories came back, and I finally knew that that never happened to me. But absolutely, they were sitting in some back room in a floating pool that I was not accessing. Mm-hmm. But I knew about it. Like it's like that kind of thing. Like, oh yeah, well, we know about it, but we don't talk about that stuff.
Well, you could argue that Joy maybe was tricking this, because that this mechanism they don't deal with trauma, well, which is fine. But
I think that again,
but these memories. So as the memories pop back into the conscious mind from long-term memory, because that's how it works, is that they would bring those balls, and there would be a projection that would project into the mind's eye of Riley, by the way, that's her name. And I guess you would say that Joy would have this yellow filter in front of the memories that would filter the memory, because, as the projection is going through the ball, that is very negative, right? I guess it'd be like a fear or something, or a disgust or something. But then Joy sticks a yellow thing up in front of it, and it projects the memory, but filtered through a neutral or joyous lens.
I could really resonate with whatever metaphor they were constructing. I could resonate with it, because
the suppression,
and then it flooding back uncontrollably.
Okay.
Because that was how it felt when I reached a point in I think I was 29, where I had what might have been a panic attack or an anxiety attack or whatever, where it was stuff that was always there. Just some mechanism had been like, let's just put it over there in the faraway pool and stuff. But it was there. And all of a sudden it bubbled all to the surface uncontrollably. And that's when I had to start dealing with it through therapy and many other things, was, you do end up having to pay that bill. Right. And so I love that whatever, that system that she had, the jerry-rigged system, it felt relatable to me. It's like, we're not going to talk about this. We're going to put it away. And then as she's growing up, in her case, this was at 13. I couldn't relate to having a moment like that at 13, but I certainly could relate to having it later, right? Where all of a sudden anxiety and all these new emotions come into play, and then things get out of control, and boom, and it explodes.
Right, yeah, thanks for emphasizing that. Yeah, there's so many layers to this. You could say that her defenses had been stripped down because she now had to face that no one was there for her, that she had rejected her two best friends, and her two best friends were going to a different school, which was terrifying her, because that's how this all started.
That's right. Yeah.
And then these other cool kids are not really her friends and looking down on her. She's alone. Her parents aren't there. She's just she's stripped everything away, and there's no ability to defend. And then that's when all this stuff comes flooding back. Yeah. So watching this scene, the Joy and Sadness and everyone, they're all in the control room now, and Joy gets anxiety to let go and pulls, and anxiety doesn't have any control. That was a part of it. It's like anxiety's like, I can't stop myself. Right. I've worked myself in too much of a frenzy, and so Joy stops, and then they manage to rip away the ornament that's like, I'm not good enough, and they put in or a new ornament is created or something that says,
it seems more complex.
A little bit more nuanced of I'm a good person, but it incorporates those negative emotions, or at least some of them. And it's more nuanced, it's more gray zone, and yet I'm still a good person. And that is a major developmental phase that has been talked about a lot, that when we're young, we're more black and white, and we split, as they call it. And then when we're older, we hopefully graduate to a point where we say, I'm a good person, but I have some bad qualities. And my parents are good people, but they have some unfortunate qualities. Because when we're young, we can't integrate those.
Right.
We need to split. You're either all good or you're all bad. And when you have dysfunction and trauma that interrupts that development, then you develop things like borderline personality or narcissism or something like that. Anyway, so then the self, without anyone with their hands on the controls, which is, I thought, an interesting concept. You would be tempted to put Joy back in the driver's seat or something.
Right.
But the sense of self independent of the emotions, actually controls. It's like this elder brain or something. It's like it's beyond even the emotional control. It's a more solid, and it's based on all of these experiences that have become integrated into the self. And it's Riley and her sense of self based on her idea of herself and all these experiences that coalesce into the sense of self, and that's what calms her. She just needs the emotions to get out of the way, the anxiety, get anxiety out of the way. You don't need joy, you don't need sadness in this moment. You just need, who am I?
Right.
Am I a good person? Because if I'm not a good person, then I'm panicking. But if I am a good person, then it doesn't really matter what's happening right now, because I'm still a good person. Even though I just totally screwed up, and maybe no one is gonna love me, and I'm gonna be uncool, and I'm never gonna make the team, and my friends are gonna hate me, but I'm still a good person.
Right.
And then she calms down, and then her friends come over and they reconcile, and then it's happily ever after until the next phase of life. So yeah, it for me, I think I gave it an 8, which is a really high mark for me, because of what you were saying. Of the first one was just so mind-blowing and so novel and just so moving and just so perfect. Like, I might not rate any other movies this year more than an 8. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're like, that could be like one of the best movies this year.
I've watched the first one multiple times, and each time I only like it more. This one, I've only seen it once, and my experience was so intense. I really haven't cried.
Were you
that
with
much.
your family?
Yeah, and so I was just like,
were they looking at you going, "Daddy's crying a lot"?
I mean, it was at the theater, so it was dark, and I was like, but it was so much. I wasn't kidding. I was just like soaked, and I was crying from like the start, like just nonstop. So because of that, I just felt like, wow, they really got my number, But yeah, it'll probably end up neutral at around 9 or something. But because there are things where I was like, if I was being critical, but still, they managed to pull off a sequel.
Yeah.
To such a good movie.
Yeah. And it's funny, I rewatched Inside Out 1 like a month ago in prep for this, and I once again loved the movie so much that I actually DM'd Pete Docter on Instagram thanking him for making Inside Out 1.
Nice.
I'm guessing he never saw the DM, but who
that's
knows?
Still,
which I never do. I don't usually do that kind of stuff. Okay, so predictions for Inside Out 3, because you got to figure that Pixar is like, holy shit, we've really nailed it with this.
Right.
You got to have a sequel here that will wrap this up.
Right.
And so what age, threshold would they? Because the puberty thing, that's kind of like an obvious thing that you would do. But what would be the next threshold? Yeah,
I mean, you cannot do it chronologically, I think, meaning the next movie might come out in 3 years, but if you did that, she's 16, because I think there might be too much overlap.
Right.
Right? Like we may not discover different enough things. I think you were onto something with the transition between ending high school and leaving the house.
Yeah.
I think that might be it. I could also see it like she's actually out in the real world. Like that's the other thing I could imagine, or maybe that's movie 4 like they did with Toy Story. But because I could see a thing where she's now out in the real world. So, it's post-college, or maybe, actually it's post-college. She's working. And she still keeps in contact with her parents. And then, Joy catches us up a little bit. Oh, there was the rough spot. Trust me, leaving home was not easy. These kind of things. But now she's an adult. Adults are fine. Yeah. Adults don't go through any more changes. Yeah. Adults don't have any more.
I'm just trying to think of major plot points in development that you could focus on internally, right? It's not just externally, but internal. Well, one that is both internal and external is a romantic relationship. But it couldn't be like when she's 14 and she has a crush. I guess you could focus on like a major relationship late high school or a major relationship college. You could even skip forward, as you say, like pretty far, and it's like it's contemplating getting married to someone or even having your own kids. That could be interesting.
Like, I mean, she could technically still be in college, but I was thinking, is like, there's so many things about the first real job you have, and that you're gonna live by yourself, and you have to, like, there's so many things that are so scary and blah blah. And to your point, like a stable long-term relationship, but what does that mean?
But that first one, the plot and the metaphor of the psyche, you could argue would be the same as this one. It's still like, am I good enough or something? You know what I mean? That would be the challenge of me at work. Whereas if you are navigating who am I in relation to someone else, or how do I react to attachment with a life partner of some sort, like that would involve elements of the psyche that have yet to be because that's the thing, you have to live in the brain of Riley. It can't just be further adventures of the current configuration. So it would have, to me, it's like there's a whole thing that they haven't dealt with yet in Riley's mind, which is, I am now navigating a connection, an attachment, a you and a me, and all of the hurt and the pain and the worries and the love and the glory.
Okay. I'm buying your point, but then I'm going to bring it back into high school then. Not 16 necessarily. I actually think you could mix things where it's like, because, there are all these aspects. You start planning for who am I post this school thing. And if you introduce the romantic relationship, where are they going? Where am I going? Am I leaving? Am I staying? And my parents? Am I leaving my parents? So actually there could be a lot to that. So I think the senior year might actually be, and there's all the anxiety about the college tests and all the things, like like SATs and what school am I going to go to? And then to your point, you root it around the relationship. And a senior year relationship can be quite serious, right? Like a lot of people get married right out. So but
there's all these other elements to this that could influence the decision makers of Inside Out 3, which is, do we really want to make it about romance? Because do we make her heterosexual? Do we make her gay? Do we make her cis? What do we do here? Because so much hangs in the balance.
But I kind of liked your angle, which was because, look, of course,
although we've established that at least she's likely heterosexual.
Well, that was in the first movie.
But there's also Boy Band Island.
Yes.
Which isn't necessarily anything.
There were rumors that I heard after the fact, after I saw it, I heard rumors that they were considering in this movie having pushed that she actually liked that older girl, romantically. Mm-hmm. But then they pulled back because they didn't think they could make it relatable enough or whatever. Meaning to the mass market Pixar audience, right? So, is it a non-brave decision? I don't know. But I will say that I guess I'm biased here, but I might have felt like they were pandering or something because they didn't establish that in the first movie, but she was too little, so maybe it doesn't matter. I don't know. Either way, what I like, though, is I like your angle that, to me, it matters a little less which direction she goes preference-wise.
Yeah.
What matters more is, and it also, because the cheap way to go would be like, oh, I like that person. Oh, I'm having all these new emotions. I feel like, but we've seen those movies, right? I like this idea of like, no, they're actually already in a relationship.
Yeah.
And it's exploring that problem.
And the metaphors would be interesting in terms of you are actually joining someone's life, right?
Yes.
You're bringing your psyches together.
Which is why maybe a little older might actually work.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking, the senior year has so many, like that was the first thing you said, that has so many life changes attached to it. But
they're still based in Inside Out 2 metaphors.
Right. But if you're going to base it more on what, which I like, where you're going, which is this like, well, no, so far it's been you and you alone. Now you have this thing.
Right.
Then it might help for it to be like, she's just a little more, she's an adult and she's dealing with this.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know, because part of it is like, oh, but we've been following Riley's growth.
Right. It would feel really weird if suddenly she's like 33 and she lives in an apartment or something.
Especially funny for I'm thinking of my 13-year-old who like could identify. She could identify, and then she's like, "Oh, well, okay, fine, whatever." So
so if we assume that in all likelihood the decision makers will say, "Well, we have to do senior year in high school," it would be too abrupt. For her to be post-college, people would be upset about that. There's got to be some plot that we can do here, and maybe they don't introduce any new elements to the psyche that because what a lot of experts will say is that by the time we're past puberty a little bit, we have established a lot of the core elements of our psyche, the defenses and the sense of self and the theory of mind and the differentiation level and at least some of one's identity has already been established. Maybe it would be that. Maybe it'd be like more identity stuff, like where I fit in the world.
Okay, but consider the yes, quite possibly. But all of a sudden, I like the idea that you could be showing both her emotions and the romantic partner's emotions.
Right.
Kind of how, like in the first movie, they did more in the first one where they showed the parents one. But in this case, it's like a war. It's kind of
like the two angers are both at the right. Maybe it would just be that. Maybe it wouldn't be like a huge relationship. Yeah. Maybe it would just be like the first kind of
serious.
And the movie ends with
a breakup,
with a bittersweet breakup. Yeah. And she goes off to college. Yeah. And you just don't know what Riley's going to do. Yeah. Yeah. Right. That would be good. That would be really good. And you don't have to change. You don't have to add anything new. You could, because you got 9 and plus 10, you got nostalgia.
You don't want an Encanto moment where, oh, by the way,
you just keep adding more and more.
Awkward moment at the party.
I know.
I was like, it was great. I had great conversations. Some of them got.
Well, I came into this like halfway. So how did this start?
Well, some of them got political. Those were less fun. But
really?
Oh yeah.
Who were you talking to? Political
there
stuff.
There was one of your guests who I love dearly, who was. Oh,
I think I know, right?
Was like, he's like, well, I could never vote for him. That's impossible. But I just don't know her. Is she a Manchurian candidate? So I just don't think I'm going to vote.
Wait, Manchurian?
Yeah.
Literally?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So I was like, anyways, I just started making snarky comments. But this other conversation was great because we're sitting there bonding about Scooby-Doo. We both love Scooby-Doo. Their costumes were Scooby-Doo. And so we're like talking. It was just great. And then they say...
So you're talking about Alina. You can mention Alina.
Okay, Alina.
Alina will be listening to this prior. Alina's an employee of Psych.
And we're having this great conversation. We're talking about Scooby-Doo. Again, amazing stuff. And they say something about Encanto, about how great Encanto is or something like that. And I was like, oh. And they're like, what? You don't like it? And I was like, well, okay. And that cracked my knuckles. Let's start at the very beginning.
And I came in a little bit after, like maybe 10 seconds after that, and I hear something like...
I'm in the middle of my diatribe.
And things that we had talked about actually on the podcast.
And I'm like, and because I was going off about how they had the opportunity with the sisters, and instead of resolving their whole arc in the one last chorus of one song, and blah, blah, I was like doing this.
Right. Meanwhile, Alina's just like, I don't know, I just kind of liked it.
I kind of liked it. But they empathized with me. Okay. And that was important. They respected my point of view. And it wasn't like I was saying, you are dumb for believing this. In fact, I made it clear that I am in the minority here. The movie won an Oscar. Even in my country, it is beloved by many people. But just have strong opinions.
There's a lot of people who agree with you that the script seemed to have gone through a number of filters. Yes. Like where it started...
Too many cooks. Many cooks.
Where what was the theory, or maybe even news came out that the original story was focused on the two sisters, and then they sort of
that was my theory.
They abandoned that, but left the skeleton.
Actually, to be clear, that was my wife's theory, and I adopted it because I like it. All the pieces were there. Like if you watch it. There was this really great story about these two sisters, and I just feel like they got a little flat-footed, whatever. Anyways, and they had so many characters. So I don't want Inside Out 3 to be like, okay, well, the one thing that worked well for Encanto was having a lot of characters. Yeah. Let's keep adding more characters.
Yeah, let's add more emotions. Which I'm trying to think if they did add more. Well, Lust, maybe add one
One
emotion, right? Would be
we'll have one.
Like attraction.
And that could be funny. It's like, yeah, you could just imagine that
Pepe Le Pew or something. Okay.
But I really like this idea that the variety comes from the battle of the emotions, you know?
Riley's emotions are all on the same team.
Yeah.
And we are also shown the other person's emotions and how those things interact, right?
And you could use a metaphor like the Hunt for Red October or something where because you don't, each side does not see each other, right? But it's like the wits, but then there's an infiltrator, and maybe that's lust, or maybe, and the infiltrator's like trying to like sabotage a little bit, like no, whatever. So I think it could work. It could be fun.
Yeah.
And it does need a deeper thing, which is, I think, maybe that's the part where maybe the theme is like, once you find that, you can't let go because it's such a strong thing. But then maybe
what's the climax?
It's learning
so to speak.
Yeah, it's learning that like it's okay. This doesn't define the rest of your life, or this doesn't fundamentally change who you are. It's okay to have had this strong relationship. You can move on, or something like that,
Yeah.
Because there's several paths it could go.
Am I lovable? I guess that would be the question.
One path, I love that. And one part it would be, hey, I need to learn that it's not just about me, right? Like, I now need to make room for this, right? Okay, that's one path. The other one could be, like you're saying, well, am I even lovable? I don't know if that'll be well supported, but it could be. The other one would be this other one about loss. Like, okay, and not just any loss.
Maybe that's where nostalgia comes in.
That would be interesting, yeah. And it's not just any loss, because your first love can be very defining.
Right, yeah. It's got to be, first love.
Yeah.
Yeah, first love.
Yeah.
You got to do first love.
Yeah.
Given that 2 was about friends.
Right.
1 is about family, 2 is about friends. Yeah. So 3 would be about partner.
It's like, I had girlfriends and things, but then my first love, that thing that was a Y in the road.
Right. And maybe there would be some physical element of the psyche that is introduced that represents lust, romance, and also the memories of. Maybe there would be an island or something of actual romance, because all of us have a representation of all of our romantic experiences, especially our past romantic.
And by the way, if they did go with her being non-binary or some variation, I think it would be really brave and good if that wasn't what the movie was about at all. Like, that's just taken forgiven, and the movie starts, that's just like a one-liner from Joy. Oh, and by the way, here's one. The rest of the movie is all the things anyone has to experience.
Yeah, in fact, the It's It Out 2, there were a lot of girls of color. And it was not the focus.
It was not a thing.
It wasn't like, oh, she's good for a Mexican or something. It was just like, there's all these different colored skin individuals, and it's just a part of the world. It's fine.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, that'd be interesting. Like I said, we'll see. But I like that. I like that angle. I like the idea that it's gonna be.
Well, let's pitch.
Another person.
I'm best friends with Pete Docter because
let's do it. You tagged him.
I did DM him on Instagram. So
you've slipped into.
I feel like we've already written it. Yeah.
Maybe the next movie will be she's actually become famous since the second movie, and she gets DM'd by some rando, and it's about struggling with what to do with these weirdos that DM you in real life.
All right. Well, there's more we can say. Like the deep, dark memories, right? Like,
oh my gosh, that was funny as hell.
Yeah.
The locked memories in the big rooms. That was so funny.
I didn't really understand. I understood the big, dark, hooded creature was something that we don't know about, right?
Yeah.
It's something that even in the post-credit scene, Joy is actually like, do you want to come out? And he's like, no. She's like, yeah, okay.
Later.
But like, why were those other things in there? Why would...
Because the one we learned about was the burning the carpet, right?
Oh.
That was one of the deep, dark
okay.
series. And by the way, another thing I could totally relate to, but maybe a little younger, but maybe around that age, right? Like, I've mentioned this one before, how when I was, I don't know, maybe second grade or no, actually, I do know, right? because I got disciplined at school and I had to take a letter home for my dad to sign. And I couldn't have him sign it because I was so terrified of what would happen. So I hid it. My desk at home had a sheet, like a drawing sheet taped on top. And I lifted it carefully and I hid it under and I taped it back. And, and I struggled every day with anxiety for like a year or maybe 2 years. I don't know, that my dad would find it. Like I remember thinking about it all the time. Well, time went by and maybe 2 years later, when you're little, time is weird. So I don't know if it was 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. But sometime later, my dad was cleaning my room, took off the thing and found the letter. And then I come home and he's like, I found this. And I was like, oh, right.
Yeah, we've talked about this. It's just, it's so cute that you never threw it away.
Yeah, it was right. Why wouldn't I just dispose of it?
Yeah.
Why would I hide it?
Yeah.
The child brain is marvelous
but it shows you don't have any guile.
Yeah,
like with me, like, why didn't I just, when I was alone at the dinner table and they're like, you must finish your dinner,
right.
Why didn't I stuff my mouth,
right.
Go to the bathroom, spit it in the toilet,
same,
or throw it out the window or give it to the dog? Like, it just never occurred to me.
Yeah, I know. Like, those options weren't in my mind. They weren't options I considered and rejected.
Yeah,
they were never options.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I never considered it, and I wish I had.
I had friends that absolutely had those options.
Oh yeah,
and always took them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and it would always actually puzzle me. I'm like, you did what? As an example, I've mentioned that oftentimes there were these assignments where you had to keep a journal for months, and I would never do it because I don't know why. I couldn't do it. I had ADDs, some amount of things. I don't know. Time would come by. The assignment was due the night before. I could barely sleep. I couldn't do anything about it. The next day, I wouldn't turn it in. And then I'm talking to my friend. I'm like, well, this sucks. I'm going to get an F. I didn't do the assignment. He's like, what? What? You didn't do the assignment? I'm like, no. I'm like, you did it? He's like, yeah. Oh, so you kept a journal all this time? No. Last night, I invented a journal. What? It didn't even occur to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I would have been the same. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I think that shows modeling what we were modeled. It also shows we didn't need guile to survive. Some people do.
Yeah.
I think it says something. It says that we were raised well enough
except for the discipline to do the damn journal for me. but yes.
But kids, they put things off. All right. Well, that does it for that episode of The Psychology of Inside Out 2, Berto's desiccation. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself and drink lots of water before you watch Inside Out 2 because
you deserve it.